My backgrounds have been basic as an afterthought with simple one-point perspective drawings like this race scene here. But learning the fundamentals of perspective and playing with interesting angles are keys to dynamic poses and scenes. The different types of perspective all boil down to how many vanishing points there are. Starting out with linear perspective, we have one-point perspective, good for when you want to create a single strong focal point or when you're looking directly at the front plane of an object. So your eyeballs are pointing directly perpendicular to the plane you're looking at. Even though it can be pretty basic, you can make one-point perspective interesting with the tilt on the horizon line. Next, we have the two-point perspective with two vanishing points on opposite sides of the horizon line. This is good when you're seeing two perpendicular sides of an object, pretty much when you're looking at a corner edge of a linear object. Things start getting a little more interesting with three-point perspective as the third vanishing point establishes a sense of height, looking up or down at an object. A good shortcut to remember this is when the third point is below the other two, an upside down triangle, then that's the bird's eye view. But if it's above the two vanishing points, it's ant's eye view. After learning the basics of linear perspective, you can mix and match multiple focal points to each object to vary the picture. Learning the first three perspectives is enough to get by, but we want to get a little crazy. So moving on to curvilinear perspective, we have 4-point perspective or a cylindrical field of vision. In this, only one axis, horizontal or vertical, is rotated, introducing curve from opposing top and bottom vanishing points or left and right vanishing points. Here I'm doing vertical axis curves. Progressing to 5-point perspective, the fisheye perspective, you can see a whole hemisphere of vision with both vertical and horizontal lines curved to vanishing points. The fifth vanishing point is usually in the center as well. This is my favorite to experiment with as the distortions here are really interesting and the lines feel more organic. A cool artist I've found that experiments with perspective really well is the Japanese artist Wacom, playing with both linear and curvilinear perspective to produce really cool art. You can find him on Instagram and Twitter, going over his drawings in Japanese, but I love to dissect his pictures myself. This first picture looks like a simple 1-point perspective, but if you look, it's really a 2-point perspective with the vanishing point way far out with the actual picture. I recommend making your vanishing points very distant as well if you're trying to avoid too much unintended distortion. These purple lines are pretty much parallel to the horizontal line, but Wacom makes it interesting by tilting the horizon line. Eventually, I want to further develop the skill to see the vanishing point outside the frame of the picture, but for now I hope this helps to draw it out. In Wacom's next piece, we have a 3-point perspective looking down at the girl in her room, so that third vanishing point is going to be below the other two. In breaking it up, it's helpful to think of the planes of the room as its own grids. The green lines represent the grids of the floor plane, the red lines represent the vertical grid of the wall perpendicular to the floor, and the purple lines is the horizontal grid of the wall. These building blocks help to form a picture where you feel the character is way below you in sight. Wacom's next piece is a really cool example of a multi-point perspective. Most of the objects are focused on this vanishing point with the red lines, followed by a second green vanishing point with the green lines intersecting that. But there's another vanishing point not related to the main objects of the piece, like with this cube building oriented in a different way. This adds more visual variation to the piece. Finally, moving on to the fisheyes, we have a 5-point perspective in this picture, with the walls usually straight-edged being curved vertically and horizontally. The red lines are the horizontal curved axis, the green lines are the vertical axis from the bottom axis, and the purple lines are vertical curves from the top axis. All of these vanishing points give you a feeling that you're looking at a security camera or GoPro footage where the character is closer because of that curving distortion. So getting into my drawing for the day, you can set up linear perspective vanishing points by clicking Layer, Ruler Frame, Create Perspective Ruler. And for this one, I'm going to go with 3-point perspective as I'm going to be doing a city scene from a bird's eye view. So I want to develop a sense of height. Now again, when placing your vanishing points, it looks more convincing when the points are way outside of the paper, unless you're going for an over-exaggeration in distortion. And like with everything, we can just use basic shapes for guidelines. For this scene, I'll just fill up the paper with buildings. Then I'm going to have my figure, who we're also looking down at, walking pretty high up in the sky. To exaggerate the perspective, I'm making the head slightly larger than the body since it's closer to the viewer. If you want to learn how to draw faces from different angles, feel free to check out my videos linked below. Next, I'm going to draw some paper falling down to further exaggerate that sense of height. The sheets at the top look bigger in size to the viewer than the sheets at the bottom, to develop that sense of depth as objects move down. I also wanted elements that weren't perfectly linear to keep the image interesting, with more organic sweeping lines to contrast with the geometric rigid shapes of the buildings. As for the figure, I want to see if I can foreshorten more aspects like potentially this hand, but I'll keep playing with it. After drawing a bunch of cubes and rectangular prisms for the guidelines of the buildings, I'm finally ready to start with some details. I recommend looking at references of buildings to get ideas of what is there in reality so that you can improvise with your line work. I definitely use reference to draw the rooftop generators and fences, but at the end of the day, it's a bunch of cubes, lines, and rectangles when you break it down. Clip Studio really helps in helping you follow lines to vanishing points to the T, but for those drawing on more traditional paper, you have to get a sense of where the vanishing point is to follow the perspective, but sometimes trying to do it organically leads to something that's prettier than what's technically right as long as it's believable. So as I develop the foreground, I'm going to make it like a surreal corporate drawing with an office computer, keyboard, and a printer just levitating in the air to make the city background stand out. I usually like to draw the characters first before the background, but I tend to think of the background as an afterthought when I do it in that order. So for this video, I want to make the background extremely detailed before I draw the figure that will interact with the environment that I create. When making comics though, you can draw the background in detail to make an establishing scene, and then draw your characters in slightly less detailed backgrounds once you give your reader an idea of where the characters are. But for this drawing, I'm going to make it detailed. What are your thoughts on the order in which you draw the characters in the backgrounds? I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Anyways, I'm going to zoom through the components after the background, but I'll draw the falling papers and a businessman as the character of the drawing and call it a day. If you want to see the finished drawing, I'll post it on my Instagram listed below. I'll eventually explore drawing figures from different perspectives, but I hope these basics of perspective help out in drawing cool backgrounds for your drawings and comics. And with that, we wrap up our video. If you found this content helpful, please consider leaving a thumbs up below and subscribe if you want to see more content about creating comics and manga. If you want to follow my other social media and work, the links are in the description. Finally, if you have any suggestions for future videos you'd like to see, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'll see you guys next time.